Welcome back to the Objective Arte podcast. I'm your host, Mike Lorario, and today we're speaking with Ceci Craft. She's the Director of Mental Performance, Life Skills, and Education with the Philadelphia Phillies. In this episode, we'll learn the value of understanding who you are and dedicating yourself to that, the importance of pushing past normal in any quest to be elite, why you should always have a pencil with you, and the difference between a side hustle and a side piece. Let's get to it.
Ceci, great to see you. We've known each other since 2008, and man, the time has just flown. But I love everything you're doing. You have always been someone I've referred to as a rock star, but I can't do that anymore because Workday and Billy Idol have absolutely destroyed that. And so, since this is episode 007, I'm calling you our secret agent. You're certainly a secret weapon, and it's a pleasure to have you join us today. So thank you.
It's awesome to be here. Thank you so much for having me. This is an honor.
Well, all right, let's get into it. So I know I can't call you a sports psych. We ran in,
I know you cannot.
we ran into trouble with that with some Navy dude once upon a time, and so you're not a sports psych. But if I got it right, we can call what you do applied mental performance.
Yeah, or just mental performance. I love the term mental performance coach.
Okay, so it's safe to say, I think, that the field of applied mental performance coaching is not a male-dominated field by any measure. Is that right?
No, it's not. I think with its roots in psychology, it actually has become certainly more kind of gender neutral, both, or at times female dominated. I know with the Phillies, my staff is female dominated.
Yeah. And so to me, that's interesting because you work in this field of applied mental performance coaching, and yet you've chosen to find your excellence, to find your fulfillment in two fields that are absolutely male dominated. I mean, Army Special Operations and Major League Baseball. Could they get any more male dominated?
No.
I don't think so either. So, all right. So having done that now for, man, I mean, what are we talking about? 14 years, 15 years?
Yeah.
At least, right?
Yeah.
What are the lessons learned? What do you walk away from, experiences that you would share with other people to help them understand you can achieve your highest potential even working in this area where it's dominated by something that's not like you?
Yeah, I think it's worth speaking to some of my youth and natural inclinations. So I was definitely a tomboy growing up. And I think it would be unfair to just say, like, with no practice being in male dominated spaces, I just jumped into working in these spaces. I was a tomboy growing up. In sixth grade, I wanted to play like football and soccer at lunch, and I came home with grass stains all over my clothing. I was not good friends with the girls in the class. I think many of them didn't like me because I was hanging out with all the boys. I played football in high school, and they didn't have lockers that fit football pads. So I had a locker in the men's locker room, the varsity men's locker room in high
Can I
school.
stop you right there? Stop you right there for a second. So this is something our audience needs to understand, is because I don't think you'll tell them, is that you have the distinction of being the first woman to score points in a high school football game as a kicker for the Berkeley High School.
Berkeley High. I believe that's correct.
It is now.
As of now, it is. I did end up in the Hall of Fame for them, so that there's something there that I did. I don't know, but yeah. So I clearly gravitated to this space, or found some comfort in this space early on. I do think if you want to be a female working in male-dominated communities, jobs, I think you have to understand who you are and how you're perceived. I started working in these spaces when I was about 26. That's really different than working in this space when you're 41 and married with 3 kids. So I think it's worth knowing how you're going to be perceived. I think you have to appreciate the obstacles you're up against. When I was first working with Special Forces soldiers, there really weren't females, even in contracting spaces, that were very common. And I knew this because if I went to another place, they'd be like, "Oh, you were the female I heard about on a range 3 weeks ago," or "I thought I caught sight of you across the woods." There weren't others. And so I think knowing that, as odd as it was with me being, we'll say, a minority, I also had the obligation to show the majority how it was going to feel to be in a space with me and set overt, clear guidelines of what that interaction was going to look like. My comfort probably helped. I didn't feel uncomfortable in that space, but guys really didn't know what to do with me at first. And so I think it really helped to be able to, I don't mind swearing. If I'm in your space, I'm in your space. I'm a guest in your home. So you can do what you normally do. There's a big difference between you having a conversation directly to me about something that might be offensive, and you having a conversation on the side with your buddy about something that I may find offensive. You're allowed to have whatever conversation you want around me. If you direct it to me, we may have a different issue. I think I loved what the Special Forces guys were doing. I grew up backpacking and hiking. Thank you to my mom and dad. All throughout Yosemite, we were doing a lot of backpacking and hiking, rucking and moving through woods. I loved being in that space. So I think there was a lot that so much of my upbringing helped fall into place. But I also think there was a piece of you do need to be better than having anyone else because it's comfortable to have a guy out there. And you can get replaced by a guy that's half as good but way more comfortable. And so, how do you add value and apply all the other skills that go along with who you are? And then I think there's some benefits. I certainly over the years, I oftentimes know when my guys are going to get engaged because they want to show another woman the ring and get her thoughts on it. I know about babies early, and it's really easy to ask about them. I at this point having kids can help advocate for. Certainly with a professional baseball player, they've got the money. Go get a night doula if your wife is struggling with sleep. So I think over time there are pros to being female too. That if you get past that initial reaction, a lot of benefits come out. I think even right now with the locker room that Philly has, I think a female has a leg up. We got a lot of old guys that are married with kids, and I don't mean old, relatively to baseball. And I think it's easier sometimes to open up to a female than it is to another guy.
Chuck Ritter here, Director of Operations at Objective Arte. If you're a fan of our podcast, then check out the Arte Journal at www.objectivearte.com. We write, curate, and publish articles that share knowledge to springboard your life to the next level. Live with purpose, embrace adversity, and relentlessly pursue excellence. Sign up for our newsletter while you're there and get updates on our latest articles, podcast episodes, and upcoming events. Or just drop us a note with future podcast topics and guest suggestions. That's www.objectivearte.com. Now, back to the show.
No, I love all of that. There's some gems in there. I was almost going to ask you about what advice you would give the other side, the men who have to maybe integrate this woman coming in, but you covered that, and I don't want to dig into that too much more than what you said about.
I will say one conversation I had recently we have a new head of player development who I'm very excited for. I think he's going to be phenomenal. And he was asking, post game for baseball, historically, coaches would sit around their lockers and have a beverage of choice and discuss the game. And locker rooms can be tough because people change in that space. And if you're a female coach, you'd love to hear those post game conversations. And I think there are plenty of women that have been in that space and done it really thoughtfully and respectfully, averting eyes, turning directions, being strategic about how they do that. But he brought up, hey, should we be looking for a neutral space here? And I felt like that would be a pressure relief for both sides. Candidly, I think some of our male coaches felt uncomfortable changing in front of a female out of respect for their significant others. And I think we have to find that respectful place for both. So yes, I think there's lessons to learn on both sides, and I think we continue to evolve and get smarter in those spaces to relieve unnecessary tensions.
Yeah, work is hard enough without creating extra.
Yes.
No, I would say my observations of you from the very beginning, you were comfortable in your own skin, and you were comfortable meeting the client, so to speak, where the client was. You are very good at, because I've seen you also with the Cleveland Indians, now Guardians, and the Phillies, very comfortable at meeting them in their space and getting them to where they need to be, not where you think they need to be or where you want them to be. And so that's all really been a fun journey to observe. So next question, we mix these metaphors all the time. Combat becomes an analogy for sports. And, every soldier out there wants to be like a world-class athlete. And in many ways, we've gotten a lot better. Our friend Chuck Ritter is been put back together and is healthy again because he's worked with a lot of people that treated him like the world-class athlete he is. 30 some odd surgeries, blown up once, shot twice. And so I think the metaphors have appropriate connections and crossover. But what do you think are the greatest differences, or also the greatest things that matter when you're talking about people who are trying to get to these highest levels? We use the word elite,
Hmm.
right? And especially in the organizations where you've been at, professional baseball, major league professional baseball, when you get all the way up to that level, Army Special Operations, right? Everybody there is trying to be elite if they're not there already. Where are the commonalities? What have you learned working in both those environments that matter?
The thing I love about both these populations is that they're built out of outlier people. They're so good at what they do that there's not a pattern to them. I think Special Forces, the operational psychs did a study to try to find common personality traits or like a personality type of Special Forces, and they couldn't. There isn't one.
Interesting.
And so what, when you work with a Special Forces team, it's 12 guys, but they are vastly different and dynamic. And so there isn't a type. You don't get good at a type. You have to appreciate the individual and what's made that individual so good at what they do. And that's true, especially, as you move up even from the minor leagues to the major leagues, guys get kind of weirder and weirder. And I love this concept of an outlier of, what makes people super elite or extremely good is embracing their differences and leveraging those strengths. And the people that are truly super elite have really leveraged those strengths and gotten into their oddities and let go of this concept of normal. And I'll go as far as say, like, normal is mediocrity, right? Normal is average. So you have to push past that and be outlierish and weird. And so a commonality between those communities is you're working with some really unique individuals. And so you have to know them, build for them. You cannot take your equation for how you did one thing and just bump it over to the other,
Yeah.
or how I worked with this guy and how I'm just going to do it to the next. You can't. And that's one of my favorite pieces between those two groups. I do think the fact that you are preparing people to survive has to be respected. And I think if you took a pro baseball player and said, your life depends on, the shape you're in or the how you've done your craft, I think a lot of people would train differently. I think that's a place where, to me, the metaphor is you need to be careful because you're training for very different things. I got asked by a general manager in baseball once if, when I was on a range with a guy and one guy wasn't keeping up with the team, did I have to kind of convince him or sell him on working with me? No, his team will absolutely take care of it. Because if someone's underperforming, they're looking for the solution to protect themselves and their friends and their teammates.
Right.
So there's also, I think, a gravity to special operations guys are going to make sure that they're ready to do what they need to do, and they are going to seek services to do that, to make sure they have what they need to get it done. Chuck wasn't going to sit on his butt and let multiple surgeries, make him fat and lazy. He was going to find the resources.
Fat and lazy. Yeah, didn't need the surgery stuff.
He was going to need to find his resources to get him back to where he needed to be to feel like he was in fighting shape. And I think that can be a very significant difference.
Yeah. I mean, so the metaphor, I think, the analogy anyway, holds in some ways. I mean, the consequences are drastically different. And so that, I think, to me is one thing. And with leadership development and what I do, I had this conversation with a client last week. Probably the worst advice anybody ever tried to give anyone in terms of leadership was, you got to treat everybody the same, right? Because that's so stupid because everybody's different. And the deal about leadership, the deal about coaching, I mean, leadership fundamentally is coaching,
Yeah.
is you have to treat everybody equally, but you got to treat everybody differently because everybody's different.
Yeah, and I think it's really a skill to meet people where they're at and be able to accept where they're at.
Yeah.
So again, I mean, even when you're working with these wildly elite people, they're still working on something. There's still areas to get better. They're still trying to maintain an edge for whatever the reason is. And so the more clearly you can see them, the more clearly they can see themselves, the better chance they have to continue to develop and grow in the ways that continue to kind of push that boundary, push that edge, push that outlierness.
Quick word from one of our sponsors, Edge Mentality. Edge Mentality is owned and operated by Ceci Craft, head of mental performance at the Philadelphia Phillies, and she's also on our board of advisors here at Objective Arte. They specialize in working with coaches, business executives, and leaders on managing high performers so they can get the most out of their athletes and employees. They also work with high performers individually and help them increase their performance under stress. I've personally worked closely with Ceci when she helped create the Special Operations Cognitive Enhancement Program at Fort Bragg, and she has definitely helped me excel in life. She is the best in the business. To find out more about Edge Mentality, go to our website at www.objectiverta.com and scroll down to the bottom of our homepage, click on the Edge Performance logo. Check them out. And back to the show.
You've worked in both the American League and the National League.
Mm-hmm.
You've gotten teams, you've helped get teams to the highest levels of the season in the World Series through the playoffs. What are some of the commonalities of within at least baseball, right? The teams that get to the championship level. Are there any commonalities of them? Because this podcast, this concept of Arate is about achieving your greatest potential.
Yeah.
Was there anything that those two teams anyway, or other teams you've observed shared?
I mean, I think absolutely. And I think one of the things that people don't always think about when they're constructing a team is not just the talent that you're adding. So, baseball has a concept of WAR, wins above replacement, and it's calculated by on-field statistics. One of the things I wish they would calculate is from a team, I don't want to say team cohesion because it's not team cohesion, but from a mental side, how those guys are going to blend in a clubhouse and work with each other. People lift each other up or bring each other down. And so I think one of the things with both Cleveland and Philly that I saw is those were teams that were having a lot of fun playing with each other, and they were making each other better players. They were raising the on-field statistical value with intangibles. So I think, Cleveland guys like Michael Brantley and Josh Tomlin and Corey Kluber and Jan Gomes, I mean, I still have guys that I talk to that, maybe played for Cleveland for a year or two or three that talk about, when I stood up in that clubhouse and I walked in and I was nervous and Michael Brantley stood up to shake my hand and said, "Man, I hated hitting against you and I'm so glad you're on our team now." And this was a young reliever, and it changed. He went from a team where he did not like being in the clubhouse and he was treated like a rookie and he was, degraded, to being a valuable member of a team. And that was the team that went and fought and, went to a World Series when they shouldn't have gone. I think Philly, one of my favorite videos is actually Philadelphia fans singing the Dua Lipa song, I think, on the subway on the way to the game. They liked being together. They partied with each other after a win. I have a really good friend here in Southern Pines who's not a big baseball person, but she was like, "I love watching the games. It's almost like watching a sitcom. Like, it's a cast of characters and you can see who they are and how they come to life on the field." They're very much fully themselves. And I think that was true of Philadelphia going after the World Series that year too, is they made each other better. And that is not a statistic that shows up on the back of a baseball card.
Yeah. I mean, I think in business, one of the things we have to remind ourselves of, and baseball is a business. Let's not be.
Absolutely.
You're judged on the outcomes,
Mm-hmm.
right? But the process can matter. And when we start talking about outcomes and process, we definitely have to get into the discussion of motivation versus morale. And I tell people all the time, I say, look, you need your people to be motivated. You want them to be happy. There's a difference.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing you explain is that, it's the teams that really matter, that really get to that place of fulfillment, that place of achieving their greatest potential, they see it as both ends. And I think that to me is the magic, right? It's not either or.
Yeah.
It's both end, but you need them to be motivated. You need them to be motivated.
Yeah.
You want them to be happy.
Well, and I think, in baseball, you're going to have motivated individuals because their next contract or the money or those are actually usually individual stats, right? So you're going to have motivation. Even when you watch teams that are out of the playoffs, you've got guys coming into contract years or arbitration. They're motivated still to perform. That's different than feeling like you have a team behind you. That's different than coming to work and liking the people you're around and feeling like they make you better. That's different from, you guys as a team hunting for the win. And I think you've got to respect that. I think you need to pay attention to what that looks like in your clubhouse, and you need to acquire players with some of that in mind.
Yeah, I think that we've talked about this a lot, but I think it's, when you're looking for new hires,
Yeah.
right? There's skills that you need, and that should be the minimum. Now, in Major League Baseball, in a Special Forces A team, I mean, that's a pretty higher level than just your normal soldier or your normal baseball player. The next thing you look for are the attributes, the intangibles, their attitude,
Right.
the way they approach work, the way they approach practice, the way they approach life. And then the last thing is, can they integrate with the team? Can they be a fit? And so I think that, a lot of people only look for the skills. They forget about those other two things. And,
Yeah.
and the skills are the least important of the three.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's such an interesting piece. Well, and the skills start to not show up, right? Or I'm going to go back to that concept of war. You have players that had amazing stats last year, and all of a sudden, like, why are all the stats waning? What this doesn't look right. Well, guys hate to come to work. They don't like the interactions. They're miserable in the dugout. They strike out, and the whole team. They feel like the whole team's against them. It's hard to perform in that environment.
Yeah.
I think performance environments are a really big deal. I think coaches are there to set contexts and environments that encourage high performance and facilitate high performance. It's one of the things they're responsible for and do. It's one of the things we're responsible and we do. And I think you want to be thoughtful about that. You don't want to create a community where it's, you know, you're not set up for success, where it's hard to perform in that environment.
Yeah. I think most of us that know anything about what you do would probably imagine that you spend most of your time with the players, but it sounds like you can get a lot of work done with the coaches.
Yeah, my first 2 years with Philadelphia, I was coaching with the big league team, and that was wonderful and a really important way to get to know Philadelphia, and I think respect what it's like to play in Philadelphia.
Not easy.
No, and the fan base and the atmosphere, because I think it was important to understand mentally what we were preparing players to do. But I've stepped away. I'm lucky enough to have my son. He's 2 years now, and I didn't want to be coaching day to day, and I didn't think it was fair to the players that handedly my son was going to take priority. And for our major league team, they tend to need to be the priority. So I've gotten to do a lot more directing, but and so I do. I spend most of my time with coaches, managers, front office. That being said, I think even before that, when I got to Philadelphia, my first month, if you had been a fly on the wall in my office, you would have probably seen more coaches and more front office hanging around discussing stuff with me than players. I even had a moment with another mental performance coach where I said, I don't know how the players are going to feel about this. I may be the staff person and you might be the player person, and that's okay. It was pretty cool. The players did come around, but I think you can't undervalue how important leadership, context, coaches, and how amazing it is to work through them. I don't always need to have an individual relationship with the performer. Oftentimes I can do a lot more. I was going to say damage. I don't mean it that way. I can be a force multiplier, help a lot more by helping create the environment or support the coaches and weaving the mental performance component through the natural entities that already exist.
Yeah. But I mean, it's right there. Everybody would love to be at the tip of the spear, to
Yes.
use that military analogy, right? But without a strong shaft, the spear falls apart. And the sports staff, well, they're the shaft. They may feel like they're getting the shaft, but they need to be the shaft, right?
Yeah.
And so I think I see that with a lot of different clients, companies. They're just focused on the tip of the spear, and they let the rest of it kind of go to waste. They don't invest in the rest of it, and it can fall apart.
It's been a really cool focus for us this year with Philadelphia is, every year we've kind of tackled different components of being the best at what we do. And on the minor league side, there's a heavy turn this year towards a high focus on our staff and challenging them, supporting them, and really looking at how we invest in that space. To your point, recognizing how essential, and I think that creates your possible ceilings is who's coaching your players, how they're doing, what's going on for them. I totally agree, and I think it's been a really exciting space to explore.
You talked about your family there. How do you, Ceci Craft, balance the demands of work and life? What have you found that works best to create that equilibrium?
I was lucky or stupid or something, in that I had a lot of time where I was not trying to balance family and work. And so I dove straight in. And that was a wonderful period of my life because I really, I could work an 80-hour week and there was no one to apologize for. And candidly, if you got in the way of what I was trying to do, you weren't going to be around very long. And I do think when you're early in a career or a skill set or something you want to be great at, there is blood, sweat, and tears that are really necessary. And there's a level of devotion to it that a lot of people would probably tell you are unbalanced and unhealthy. I called my mom when I took the first job in baseball. I was 31. and she wanted her daughter to find love and have children. And I called her and said, don't bug me for the next 2 years about this. The only way I'm going to be good at this is to put my head down. So it's just not going to happen for the next 2 years. And it didn't. And I couldn't have, and I needed those 2 years. I worked a lot more than I didn't work. And I was pretty unbalanced, very happy, I want to say. Like, I loved what I was doing. I was not an unhappy person, but I was unbalanced.
You weren't equal. See, to me, this is a major
good point. I was not, okay. So the common term of like balance is, in these, is that you should be able to turn off work and like, I was dreaming work, right? I was thinking about it. I'd come up with great ideas on a run. I was, it never turned off for me. You're right. It wasn't equal. And I guess that the assumption when that's happening in someone's life is that it's not okay or unhealthy. I felt great.
Yeah.
Like I loved it. I was fulfilling a curiosity. I was in a huge learning curve. I loved the curve. I could feel myself getting better at it. That was that period.
Yeah. Well, that's what the situation demanded of you.
Yes.
And so you found equilibrium in putting nearly your entirety into work.
Yes.
And that's okay. Now, fast forward,
yes.
You wouldn't do that again, right?
No. So, I mean, I got married and I was incredibly lucky. And then I got 2 kids out of the deal. And I met Abby and Tuck when they were 6 and 3. And I talked a lot with the people around me about what that could look like. And candidly, I couldn't find an answer that I was okay with. It made me the type of stepmom, bonus mom, Ceci to them that I wanted to be. And I also had a lot of respect that I was marrying a very strong man that had known how he wanted to do things. And I, at this point, was a fairly strong, bull-headed person that knew how I wanted to do things. And I think marriage is a very big deal. So I stepped away from baseball for 1.5 years. I came back to working for the military. It was a more set schedule. And I think that was a great choice for us. My husband more or less kicked me out of the house at some point, told me to go back to baseball in the most loving way possible. And we had a little bit more of an idea of how our schedule worked at that point. But I think we talk a lot about values in our field, and I value family above all else. It's one thing to say it. I think it's really interesting to live it. And I think especially when when I've been someone like me that had done so much where work had naturally been able to come first, it's an interesting sensation to say, nope, I'm uncompromising on the fact that my family comes first. So Philadelphia was amazing when they called. I said, hey, I don't get Abby and Tuck all of the time. I will never miss when they're with us. So you're going to have to take second fiddle. And I know baseball doesn't do that. So you don't want to hire me. And they did. And they let me go home and be with them. And we've run into some tough spots. And I've been stubborn, as I am. I think it's really important to my relationship with Abby and Tuck and now Anders. And I think, when I talk to older coaches, people that I respect the most, the regret they always have is missing their kids' youth. And I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah.
So I think I've asked baseball to figure out some hard things. My son traveled with me the first year after he was born. So at 4 months, he went to spring training. He's probably been on more airplanes than most people. In the first year of his life, we traveled about 10 days a month. The club helped with, figuring out how to have a nanny that traveled with me. I don't think that's something we could have afforded without the club. They were amazing. And baseball figured it out, and figured it out with me. And so I've been really lucky in finding that balance, we'll say, in weird ways. But I also think there's hard decisions. And there will continue to be hard decisions on what's right for my family and our setup and what I'm willing to give and what I'm not. And I'll say my husband has been amazing about helping me find clarity in that.
That's great.
Chuck Ritter, again, Director of Operations at Objective Arte. Since this episode is about overcoming and mental performance, I want to highly recommend everybody pick up the book called The Glass Factory by Braxton McCoy. Now, this is a book about a soldier going through a traumatic injury downrange, then overcoming not just his physical wounds, but also his mental wounds. It's extremely inspirational. Don't go to Amazon, though. It's like $100 or $200. Go to his website, www.braxtonmccoy.com, and he's got signed copies for a very reasonable price. I picked this book up last year. I read through it a couple times. It's an amazing story. That's The Glass Factory by Braxton McCoy, and you can pick it up at www.braxtonmccoy.com. Now back to the show.
I think you've hit on so many great topics there. The value of team, the value of, having value, knowing what you stand for, what you will not negotiate or what you will negotiate. And the idea that balance isn't about making things equal. It's about
No.
finding your equilibrium. What works for you? What works for you and what works for the people around you. And let me say one more thing, Cece, and you earned it. Your reputation precedes you. And the time you spent with Cleveland, I'm sure, was something that was known to the people in Philadelphia. So to me, that's the other lesson there. Like, earn it. And,
Yes.
you know,
I can't speak to that enough. So I think I'm big on having accurate or honest self-awareness, taking, hard feedback with positive. And I think at this point in my life, one of the things that I need to be aware of is I'm not going to be present in the way that baseball generally wants you present. So how do I produce enough value that I get excused for that on some level
yeah.
and that I'm not resented for it? And I think there's some stuff that's tough in baseball communities, people really around all the time. And so I'm not going to avoid all the resentment, but I need to be useful to the people that I'm working for, working with, so that doesn't get in the way of me being able to help us perform as a club.
Yeah.
And that's that's always a balance. The fulcrum moves for me on that.
Nice. Glad to put a nice plug in there.
And keeping an eye on where that fulcrum should be, right? And sometimes, candidly, I feel like I owe the club, and sometimes I feel like the club owes me, and that moves. And so I think you've got to reflect and keep constant tabs, and also have honest conversations. When I was having Anders saying to the club, this may not be a good fit for you guys anymore, and that's okay. I don't expect you to make it just work for me and for you guys to get the short end of the stick. If this doesn't work, we can peacefully part ways. And that's totally appropriate, because our baseball players get 4 days of paternity leave.
That's it.
That's it.
Wow.
The military does better than baseball does. So I'm asking for something that is not normal in this community. And it's okay for the community to say, hey, in your position, that doesn't work. I sometimes I think in today's world, we expect, everyone to bend over backward. And I think if you keep an eye on, like, I still think I can produce value, but if you don't, that's okay. Like, then I'll find something else to do.
Yeah. That's great advice as well. Okay, this is the stock question for me with this podcast. You ready?
Okay.
Right. So talk to us about a time when you really wanted to quit, but you didn't. Where were you physically? Where were you mentally? What are the lessons you carry with you?
I think I blended a memory, but I remember being in Cleveland at one point, and I had maybe gone to pick up like appropriate travel attire. We traveled, kind of business casual, looking on the nicer side when we got on airplanes to travel with Cleveland. I was with the big league team, and I think I actually called a soldier that I used to work around, a really neat guy, and he was asked the odd question. You don't always, as a mental performance coach, get people to ask how you are, and he had asked. And I think at the time I had literally taken to driving to work with a pencil between my teeth, because if you put a pencil between your teeth and chomp down on it, it forces your mouth into a smile. And I knew the research that if you smiled, that it changed like hormone levels. It would generally make you happier. We don't know how to not be happy and smile. So I had physically forced myself to smile. And I was talking to this guy about how externally I had the job that everybody wanted. And yet I literally was like tearful on the way into work. And I was driving into work, I was doing it, but I was miserable. And I think at that point, I didn't know how to produce the value that I wanted to produce. I had gotten advice from people that were really trying to help, but because their position in the club was different than mine and they held more power, if I tried to do what they had advised, and when I tried to do what they had advised, it went horribly. And so I found myself in like mistakes and positions that I didn't know totally how to get out of at that point. It was kind of the point where you show up and you keep moving through what you think are the right motions, and you hope that day over day, right moment after right moment, step after step, if you just keep moving, that you'll get somewhere. And I was there. And I didn't love my day to day at that point. And it was so odd that everyone external to me was saying how amazing my life must be. I was about to go get on a chartered plane, and I was really struggling, and I didn't have the answer to solve it. And so I was putting one foot in front of the other. It had a happy ending. Like, my 4th through 6th season with Cleveland was amazing. The relationships broke through. Putting one foot in front of the other did get me somewhere. But yeah, I was literally forcing myself to smile and tearful, and talking to an old friend that knew I, had watched me get through obstacles and knew I could do it, and was trying to speak to me about that. And it seemed so far off from where I was in that moment.
So the lesson learned there is don't quit. Keep putting one foot in front of the other, and keep a pack of pencils with you in your car.
There you go. And I think sometimes you can't see a year or 5 years down the road, or you don't know what the 100-meter target looks
Sure.
like. You know what's 10 feet in front of you,
Yeah.
and so you dominate the small spaces you can. If you got 3 feet that you can see, dominate 3 feet. If you can get out to 10, great, like do that. But you're not seeing much further than that. And sometimes that, I think, in really hard obstacles, we have that moment.
Yeah, I've heard you speak before about, and I don't know if this was relative to some discussion about Alex Honnold and that incredible feat he accomplished in climbing El Capitan without a
Mhm.
rope, but it's like, what's right here in this immediate space?
Mhm.
Like, focus on that. That's great advice. Certainly, we'd all love to be able to see out into the future and have more clarity and have some idea where we want to go. But you're right. Sometimes it's just a matter of putting one foot in front of the other.
Mhm. Mhm. And I think even the expectation that you're not always going to be happy,
Yeah.
right?
Because you need to be motivated, but we want you to be
There we
happy.
go. Well, and I didn't want to change where I was. I wished it was I wish I felt different in that space. But I also still wanted to win that space. I wanted to find confidence there. Just didn't know how to do it yet. And so, yeah, a small interaction, a good hello, you know, trying to be in the right place at the right time. What I could control were very small things.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Cece, thanks for your time. If people want to learn more about you, besides following the Phillies in this next season, like, where do they go to learn more about you?
Yeah, I do a side company called Edge Mentality. And so I'm on LinkedIn underneath my name. I'm on Twitter underneath Edge Mentality. And then I am, forgive me for a novice website that's getting better, but edgementality.com. And I am taking on a small amount of clients for private practice. So that's been an exciting side piece for me. I don't know the right terminology, but
Okay,
I
good.
love that work. It keeps
Yeah.
keeps me sharp, and it exposes me to things that baseball wouldn't necessarily.
I think if we don't want Aaron to get mad, we will refer to it as a side gig or side hustle, not a side
There
piece.
we go. Aaron is my most amazing husband, and I don't want him angry. So yeah, we'll go with my side hustle. Yeah, but that's been really good and neat. I recently have done a lot of coaching of coaches or executive coaching that I've really enjoyed.
Cool. Well, again, thank you so much for your time, and looking forward to watching the journey continue. It's
Thank
been
you
amazing.
so much for having me, and I'm so excited for what this company is going to do
Yeah.
for everyone that it interacts with.
I think it's going to be great, but thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks again for tuning in. If we've earned it, please like, share, and write a review of our podcast. And go to the Objective Arte website at www.objectivearte.com to sign up for the newsletter and leave a comment. Keep your eye on the objective, pursue Arte, and be the fulcrum.